The late afternoon sun scorched the horizon, laying its heavy hand across the town of Redwater. The dirt road shimmered in the heat, every wagon wheel rut etched deep in the dry earth. Rancher Luke Mallory came striding in from the southern trail, his long legs carrying him with the kind of steady pace born of years pushing cattle across plains. A burlap sack of feed weighed down one shoulder, but the man himself seemed as unbending as the desert mesquite. His boots raised lazy swirls of dust, and the brim of his wide hat shielded his eyes from the harsh glare. It was just another trip to town, another errand before heading back to his spread miles away where his herd waited, grazing under the fading sky. Yet something in the air made him slow, a quiet wrongness that set the hairs prickling on the back of his neck. Redwater was never bustling, but there was usually a hum of activity, a blacksmith hammering iron, women haggling at the mercantile, the creak of wagons and calls of children running barefoot along the boardwalk. Today, the voices had dulled into a low murmur. People stood stiller than they ought to, eyes cast toward one place, the saloon. Luke stopped at the hitching post outside the mercantile and turned his head slightly, pretending to adjust the weight of the sack. The saloon doors were swinging gently, not from the wind, but as if someone had just shoved through them. The silence that followed carried tension like the twang of a drawn bow. Then she appeared. The young woman stumbled out from the saloon as though she'd been shoved or chased. Her hair tumbled loose, strands sticking to her flushed cheeks. The hem of her dress was ripped, her shawl hanging half off her shoulders. She looked this way and that, panic etched in every frantic glance. When her eyes locked on Luke, she froze for the briefest of moments before darting forward, weaving between two tethered horses. Her breath came fast, chest heaving, and she pressed herself against his side like a hunted animal seeking cover. "Please, cover me," she whispered. Her words were barely audible above the hush of the town, trembling, desperate. Her fingers clutched the back of his duster, small and shaking, as if holding onto him was the only thread keeping her from collapsing. Luke blinked once, slow and deliberate. He didn't ask questions. The raw fear in her voice was enough. With a soft grunt, he let the sack slide from his shoulder, hitting the ground with a thud that sent dust puffing up around his boots. His eyes lifted toward the saloon. 3 men emerged into the fading sunlight. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar that carved down the side of his jaw like a lightning bolt. The second had a thin, rat-like face, eyes darting nervously. The third chewed a toothpick, spitting the splintered end into the dirt as he stepped onto the boardwalk. Their spurs clicked against the wood as they fanned out, scanning the street like wolves sniffing out prey. The scarred man's gaze settled on Luke, and his lip curled into a sneer. "You seen a girl come by here, rancher?" His voice was sharp, carrying enough threat to make bystanders shrink back. Luke shifted his weight, planting his boots firmly in the dirt. He let his gaze travel over the 3 of them, calm and unhurried. His hand brushed the buckle of his belt, not yet near the revolver at his hip but close enough to remind them it was there. His voice, when he answered, was steady and low, the kind of tone that made men hesitate before pushing further. "Can't say I have." The girl pressed tighter into his back, burying her face against the coarse fabric of his coat. Luke didn't move. He stood as still as the land itself, a wall between her and them. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. He spat into the dirt, the brown stain spreading at Luke's feet. "You callin' me blind, cowboy? 'Cause I swear I saw her run this way." Luke's expression didn't change. Sometimes eyes play tricks. Best not to trust him too much. The rat-faced one chuckled harshly, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "You lyin' for her? Don't reckon that's smart. Sloan don't take kindly to folks meddlin' in his business." Luke tilted his head, the brim of his hat casting his face into shadow. His voice dropped lower, carrying the weight of iron. "This town's got enough buzzards circlin' without you 3 adding to it. Keep walkin'." For a long moment, the street was locked in silence. The townsfolk held their breath, watching from the boardwalks, waiting to see if blood would spill into the dust. The girl's grip on Luke's coat tightened. The scarred man finally muttered something under his breath, sharp and bitter. With a jerk of his chin, he turned back toward the saloon. The other 2 followed, their boots thudding against the wood. They pushed through the swinging doors, vanishing back into the shadows. The tension in the street released like a held breath. The townsfolk resumed their murmurs, though their eyes still lingered on Luke and the girl. She sagged against him then, her knees nearly giving out from relief. He steadied her with a hand, still watching the saloon doors. He knew this wasn't over. Men like that didn't just walk away. But for now, she was safe, and that was enough reason for him to stand his ground. Luke led her into the narrow alley beside the mercantile, the noise of the street muffling behind them. The shade fell across her face, softening the lines of fear that had been etched deep. She leaned against the wall, her breath ragged, one hand pressed to her chest as though trying to hold her heart still. Dust streaked her cheeks, and her lips trembled when she tried to speak. Luke removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, studying her in silence. His eyes, sharp as flint, took in the way her hands shook and the way her shoulders hunched like a cornered doe. He waited until she gathered enough strength to speak. "They were going to drag me back inside," she said, her voice hoarse, breaking around the edges. "I couldn't let them. I had to run." Luke's jaw tightened. "Who are they to you?" "They work for Sloan." Even saying the name made her shudder. "He runs the gambling tables. I thought I was clever enough to spot his tricks. He marked the deck, and I caught it. I spoke out loud before I could stop myself, and the whole table heard me. He smiled, all sweet-like, and told me I'd made a mistake I wouldn't walk away from. I ran, but they followed." Luke had heard plenty about Sloan. His name carried through Redwater like the desert wind, never seen on a wanted poster, never called out by the sheriff, but everyone knew he ran his games crooked. He owned half the saloon and all the men who worked it. Folks disappeared after crossing him, debts never forgiven, grudges carried to the grave. "You picked one hell of a hornet's nest to kick," Luke muttered, though not with anger. His voice carried a note of grim admiration. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she lifted her chin. "I didn't mean to drag you into this. You should have let them take me. It isn't your fight." Luke slipped his hat back on, pulling the brim low. "Ma'am, when you asked me to cover you, that became my fight. Wrong's wrong. Don't matter whose name's tied to it." She stared at him, stunned, as if she couldn't quite believe a man would risk his hide for her without knowing her name. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking again. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Luke's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "Because I've seen too many good folks turn to shadows in this town, too many heads bowed when they should stand tall. You did right calling Sloan out. A man cheats, he ought to be named for what he is. And if you're paying the price for truth, then I'll stand with you." Before she could answer, the sound of boots carried down the street again, this time heavier, more deliberate. Laughter followed, cruel and mocking. The girl stiffened, clutching Luke's sleeve. He stepped out of the alley, shielding her behind him, and looked toward the saloon. Sloan himself was striding down the boardwalk, a wide-brimmed black hat casting his face in shadow. He was lean, sharp-featured, with eyes like polished steel and a smile that didn't reach them. 6 men followed him, the same 3 from before plus 3 more, each one with a hand never straying far from the butt of their pistols. The scarred man pointed in Luke's direction, shouting, "There! He's hidin' her." The town grew still again. Shopkeepers froze at their counters, mothers pulled children off the street, and men leaned out of doorways, unwilling to miss what was coming. Sloan and his men moved into the open, spreading out across the dusty road until the gap between them and Luke was filled with nothing but tension. Luke planted himself squarely in the center of the street. His boots dug into the dirt, his coat stirring lightly in the evening breeze. He didn't reach for his Colt, not yet, but his right hand rested loosely near the grip. The girl pressed against the wall of the alley, her white eyes locked on him. Sloan's smile curved cruelly. "Mallory, isn't it? I know you're kind. Cattleman keeps to himself. So tell me, why's a man like you sticking his neck out for a stray that don't belong to him?" Luke's voice carried steady and calm, cutting through the stillness of the town. "She asked me to cover her. That's all I needed to know." Sloan's men chuckled, though it didn't sound like laughter. It sounded like rattlesnakes, coils tightening. Sloan tilted his head. "You've got grit, I'll give you that. But grit doesn't stop bullets. Hand her over, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Luke's gaze hardened beneath the brim of his hat. "Not gonna happen." The scarred man spat again, sneering. "You think you can take all of us, rancher?" Luke's voice lowered, but it carried enough weight for every ear on the street to hear. "I don't need to take all of you. Just the first one fool enough to draw. The rest'll decide real quick if they want to be next." The words hung in the air like a strike of thunder waiting to fall. Sloane's sneer faltered, if only for a heartbeat, as he studied Luke's stance, the stillness of a man who'd stared down danger before and never flinched. The 6 men shifted uneasily, none eager to test him first. Behind him, the girl stood straighter, her fear slowly giving way to something else, hope. For the first time since she'd fled the saloon, her trembling stopped. Luke's presence was a shield stronger than walls, and his defiance made the town itself hold its breath. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. Shadows stretched across the dirt street, long and sharp. The people of Redwater knew they were about to witness something that would be spoken of for years, whether a slaughter or the birth of a legend. Luke adjusted his stance, voice calm as the desert wind. "You want her, Sloane. You'll have to come through me." And with those words, the quiet of Redwater balanced on the razor's edge, waiting for the first man foolish enough to test the rancher who had chosen to stand for a stranger.